Thank you, Angel. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Micki. I'm a real alcoholic. And I can say it in Kunas country. My name's Micki Baudouin, and I'm an alcoholic. Aye! I've been sober by the grace of God since February 5th of 1987, and for that I'm really grateful. My mother's extremely proud. My children are really happy, and the state of Texas is relieved. I'm from Bryan, Texas, where the men are men and the sheep run scared, and the women are cunning, baffling, and powerful. My home group is the Hearn Happy Hour group in Hearn, Texas, and it's the best home group in the world. And I hope you feel that way about your home group. I love my home group. And I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, not just because I show up to a meeting every now and then. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous because I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor. I sponsor a lot of women. I sponsor a lot of women that make me look really good. I have service commitments in Alcoholics Anonymous. I do what's asked of me to do. And I believe in carrying the message whenever I'm asked to do so. And I love this program, and I thank God I don't get what I deserve. I want to thank Angel for being the hostess with the mostest this weekend. She's been absolutely wonderful. She's kept up with me with text messages and has made me feel welcome long before I landed my plane landed yesterday. I want to thank the committee and everyone who's responsible for me being here. I serve on our conference committee in my local area, and these things don't just happen overnight. There's a lot of work that goes into the planning and preparation to put on these events. So if you're new and you're bored, I always tell people if you're bored, it's because you're boring. And boredom is not about what's going on out here, it's about what's going on up here. So get involved, you know, and one of the things I did immediately was get involved with our local conference, and it's a good way to get involved and do some things, do some service work. So I'm just really, really glad to be here and really honored to be here. There's some people here that I love and have loved for double-digit years, and you know who you are. And there's a couple of people that just walked in that I haven't seen since the 70s. Wow. I can't wait to talk to you guys afterwards. Just absolutely incredible. And the last time this one person saw me, I wasn't doing too well. So I'm just thrilled and honored to be here. I come from an alcoholic home. My father was a wife-beating, child-beating alcoholic. And my mother's never had a drink in her life. And I was born an Army brat, so we moved all over the place, and we ended up in Hearn, Texas. And Bryan, where I live, Bryan College Station, some of you may be familiar with Texas A&M University. We I think, play LSU every now and then. And those are outside issues. But it's about 100 miles north of Houston, and Hearn is about 17 miles from Bryan. And I ended up there. My father was retiring from the military, and his alcoholism was really bad. And the abuse in our home got very, very severe. And like I said, my father was the true Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and we didn't understand anything about alcoholism. But we knew when my father drank, he did absurd and tragic things. He became dangerously antisocial. And the abuse got really bad, and my mother gave him the ultimatum of either quit drinking or leave. And he left. And for the next 20 years, until I came into Alcoholics Anonymous and understood the illness that I have, I was only able to understand why my father left. I thought my father left because he didn't love us. I thought my father left because he chose alcohol over his family. And what I know today is that the only kind of loving thing my father could do was leave, because he couldn't quit drinking. I don't know if he ever had an opportunity to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I have no clue, because we didn't understand anything about alcoholism. But it was really tough on my mom. I have an older sister, And it was really tough on my mom back in the 60s, being a single woman, trying to keep a roof over our head and food on the table. And my mother worked a lot of jobs. And my mom is an amazing woman. She'll be 83 years old this year, and a couple of weeks ago, I was out in her wood shop helping her cut up 4 feet by 8 feet sheets of 3/4 inch plywood on a project she's making. Yeah, she's pretty freaking amazing. I mean, so she does not let any grass grow under her feet, I'm telling you. But she was everything. I mean, if the plumbing needed to be done, she did that. If a fence needed building, she did that, because she was all we had. And she worked a lot of jobs, and she worked jobs that caused a lot of embarrassment for me, because there was something wrong with me from the moment I was born. I was born restless, irritable, and discontent, and I was selfish and self-centered. And my mother worked jobs that today I respect so much, but I was so embarrassed as a child. My mother was the first woman postal carrier in the 2 counties where I lived. And all my other friends' mothers were in the PTA, and they were wearing pantyhose and going to the beauty shop, and my mom's out there carrying mail. And I was so embarrassed by that. And today I'm so proud of that, you know. She really was cutting edge for a lot of things that women didn't do that they're doing now all the time. And she had to work like a man in order to make ends meet. And anyway, you know, I would love to tell you that on those days when she came home after walking in rain, hail, sleet, and snow, that she came home to a clean house and a cooked meal, but that was not the case. Because you see, it was all about me. I am totally selfish, and I'm totally self-centered, and I wanted to go play, or I wanted to do what I wanted to do, and I was never taking into consideration what she was sacrificing or what she was going through. And I was wild. I was a wild child. I was born on that razor's edge. I had to have something going on all the time. You know, I had to hang out with the older kids, and it had to be fast cars, it had to be motorcycles, it had to be something going on all the time. And I was the daredevil, and you know, don't double dog dare me to do anything, because I'm going to do it. And I wasn't good at getting positive attention, but I was good at getting negative attention. And if you're a kid like me, negative attention was better than no attention. And my sister, on the other hand, was a straight A student. She was the class favorite. She was the cheerleader. And on Friday nights, while she was cheering the football team on, I was in the parking lot stealing hubcaps and smoking cigarettes, you know. And that's just the way it was. I mean, I think I started lying as soon as I could talk, and I started stealing as soon as I could walk. I mean, I had to have something going on. And if something wasn't going on, I created something going on. I was always getting in trouble at school. I was always skipping school. I was always getting into something. And so, you know, it wasn't a big deal. I was about 12 years old, and my friends and I were walking down the street in Hearne, Texas. And if any of y'all know where Hearne, Texas is, I'm sorry. I mean, you know, it's a little bitty small town, a little Peyton Place town where everybody knows your name, you know. And my friends and I were walking down the street, and the neighbor had his garage door open. And in his garage were these cases of long neck Miller beer. It had dust and cobwebs on it. This guy couldn't have been an active alcoholic. I don't know why he had all this beer in there. But being the little thieves we were, we went in and stole some of this hot, long neck Miller beer. It was in the heat of the summer. We ran down to my friend's house. We got those beer bottles opened. It foamed all up. We sucked that foam off and drank enough of that hot liquid until we reached that feeling of intoxication, instantly followed by nausea and vomiting. We didn't have those skills that would come later on. We didn't know about appropriately coating your stomach before you go out on a night of drinking. We didn't know about putting your finger down your throat to puke so you could go back and drink some more. Nor did we know about putting one foot on the floor to keep the room from spinning, but we would learn those things later on. We got up the next morning, somehow made it in the house, and got up the next morning. I had my first hangover. My head was pounding, my eyes were bloodshot, putting water on my face, and my friend looked at me and said, "My God, Micki, I'll never do that again." And for the rest of our years in junior high and high school, I never saw that girl do that again. She quickly saw what the problem was and made the correction. And I was just as sick as she was, and I said, "You know, you're absolutely right. I'll never do that again either." And I never did. I never drank hot Miller beer again. Because that brief period of intoxication was so elusive that for the next 20 years of my life, I would do whatever I could to once again experience that sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking a few drinks. You see, for the first time in my life, it kind of went and quieted that madness that was in my soul. It kind of, for the first time in my life, made me okay in my own skin. And that's all I ever wanted, was to just be okay, where I could just take a deep breath in and just be all right in my own skin. And nothing had ever done that for me before. But for that period of time, I was just okay right then. And so we started doing whatever we could, stealing from our parents' liquor cabinets. My friend Katie in Austin talks about getting that creepy guy at 7-Eleven to go in and get your booze for you. You know, there were times when we would put wigs on and put socks in our bras so we could act, look like we were old enough to buy liquor. And we would do all those things that we could to get this stuff. We just had to have this stuff. And I quit hanging around those people that weren't doing what I was doing, and I started hanging around those people that were doing what I was doing. And a lot of them were older than I was. So I started hanging around those people, and a lot of things started happening. I started developing a reputation for being able to drink more than the football players. Now, I thought I was just getting cool, My friend Johnny H. tells me if I'd gotten any cooler, I'd have froze to death, But here I am, I'm drinking more than these football players, and I'm driving them home. And I'm starting to develop this tolerance that I don't understand. And I think I'm handling alcohol, but I didn't realize people aren't supposed to be able to handle alcohol. But I'm drinking more than them, and they're drunk, or they're passed out, or they're throwing up, and I'm still up and talking, walking, and functioning. And I thought something was wrong with them. I didn't realize something was wrong with me. And then the days would come when I would kind of come to and not remember some of what I did the night before. I would have to, have friends remind me of some of the escapades I had the night before, or they would tell me some of what I did the night before, and I couldn't really believe that I had done such. And when it was confirmed by 2 or 3 people, then, obviously I did do those things, and those things are called blackouts. And, the day would come as my drinking career progressed that I would end up drinking over the things I did while drinking. And that's that incomprehensible demoralization. It just started getting worse really bad, really quick. And about the age of 14, I found better living through chemistry. I started smoking those funny cigarettes and taking a lot of bizarre pills. I would take a lot of black market pills where you take trips and never leave the room. Want to paint a house without a ladder. Maybe lay on the ground and listen to the grass grow. I took a lot of prescription pills. Now, my name was never on the prescription bottle, but I took a lot of prescription pills, And it was not uncommon to find me out in a cow pasture after a heavy rain. So when I tell you I'm a real alcoholic, I meet the description of what a real alcoholic is on page 21 of the big book. But when I tell you I'm a real alcoholic, my problem is not really alcohol. And my problem is not those other things I do after I start drinking. My problem is living life sober. I don't like sober. Sober for me was boring. Sober for me is depressing. And as the big book describes so beautifully, I grow restless, irritable, and discontent. Not when I'm drinking, when I'm sober. And I can take sober for a very short period of time, and it doesn't take much for me to have some kind of relief. And I know it'll give it to me, and I know it'll give it to me instantly. And the consequences were never great enough until 1987, when I reached that desperation of a drowning man that it took for me to come in to Alcoholics Anonymous and do what was necessary for me to stay here. I'm so grateful for the program of Alcoholics Anonymous that has not only given me the ability to look at my life, but to make some sense of it all. When I first got sober, and if you're new, and even if you've been around for a while, you may think and look back at your drinking life and think, God, you know, all that time was a waste of time. But what I will tell you, if you work the steps and work them in order and do what your sponsor suggests, what I know today is that those years are my greatest asset today. Because those years, that when used properly, we have the ability to help save someone's life by those experiences. And when I did my fourth and fifth step, what I realized in doing that is that all my life, all I ever truly, truly wanted was for someone to love me and for me to love someone. But I didn't know how to do that. All I ever really, really wanted was to feel special and to feel important and to feel needed and feel desired, and I didn't know how to do that. I didn't know how to give that. I didn't know how to do that in a healthy way. And looking back at my life, what happened for me at 16 is I traded all that for sex. Just wanting to feel loved and to feel needed. And I traded that for sex. And what happened at 16 years of age, I found myself pregnant, not knowing what to do. In this day and age, if you're 16 and pregnant, it's not a big deal. But in 1972, in small town Texas, it was a big deal. My sister, who was older, had moved to Austin, and I ended up going to stay with her and brought an illegitimate child into this world. And a family came into my life that said, we will take this child and raise it as our own, with the condition you never see this child again. And I made that deal. I did what was best for that child because I was in no condition, shape, or form ready to be a parent. I couldn't even raise myself, much less another human being. And it took me 20 years to be able to say, you know, I did what was best for me too. And so I made that deal, and I gave this child to this family, and I came back to small town Texas with a scarlet letter on my forehead. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone knew what was going on. And at 16 years of age, I literally had to have alcohol or some chemical in my body that would allow me to walk out of my house and onto the street and hold my head up and say, I don't care what you think. I don't care what you think. But you see, I'm an alcoholic. All anybody had to do was look at me, and I knew what they were thinking. And knowing what other people are thinking about me has caused me a great deal of problems all throughout my whole entire life, you know. And I had no tools to deal with that depth of pain and that depth of loss. I mean, I had a hole in my soul and no way to fill that up. And what I know today is that was a God-sized hole. And there's only one thing you can fill a God-sized hole with. But I had to find you to learn how to do that. I didn't know how. I somehow graduated high school. I don't know how I did. I'm a good test taker. And 45 minutes after I graduated high school, I am out of Hearne, Texas. Because you see, Hearne, Texas was my problem. And if I can just get out of Hearne, Texas, and I can go somewhere where no one knows my sordid past. I'm barely 17 years old and have a sordid past. But if I can get out of Hearne, Texas and go somewhere and start over, and I'll find me a good man, and I'll have children to replace that child, and things are going to be good, and I'll be successful. And one day I'll go back to Hearne, Texas, and I'll show them all, you know. I had these great plans and these great ideas, but I had no plan of action, just good intentions. And so what I did was I moved 500 miles away for a small town right outside of New Orleans, Louisiana called Norco, where they party 24/7, and I was there 2 weeks before I ended up in jail. And I'm thinking to myself, God is punishing me. I am snake bit. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. If on and on and on. If it wasn't for bad luck, I'd have no luck at all. I mean, just on and on and on. And I'm too proud to call home. I don't know what I'm going to do. And it doesn't take a genius to get out of jail. It just takes time. And so I eventually got out of jail, and Plan B kicks in, because we always got to have a Plan B. I don't know what I'm going to do now. So what I did was I ended up marrying the guy I got busted with, so he couldn't testify against me, and I couldn't testify against him. I mean, it makes good sense, right? You got to have a good reason to get married. So we took in sick, and of course you know what happened next. Immediately I got pregnant because I was desperate to fill those voids. I'm always looking for something outside to fix my insides, and of course it didn't work. But I have 2 beautiful children from that marriage. My son Micah just turned 40 years old this month. 40 years? I have a child 40 years old. And he has served in mine and yours United States Army for 10 years. He was an airborne medic, and he's out of the military now. He's in school. And thanks to you, this month he will celebrate 8 years sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Thank you. Thank you. And I have a beautiful daughter, Monica, who is 36 years old, and she's absolutely the joy of my life. And she doesn't have this deal, and she's really interesting to watch, She's the kind that we will go to a restaurant and she'll order a glass of wine and leave half of it sitting there when we walk out. Now, I think that's alcohol abuse, She got stuck in the Dallas airport one time for 24 hours and because of weather, and she would call me crying, then she'd call me angry, then she'd call me crying. Finally, she found somewhere to go to sleep, and when she got back the next day, I said, well, did you go to the bar and have a drink? And she said, I never thought about that. I don't know what planet she came in from, but, I'm just like, wow, But, thank God she doesn't have this thing, but, she certainly was affected by alcoholism. She certainly was affected by it. And I love my children more than anything, and I wanted nothing more than to be a good mother, and I wanted nothing more than to be a good wife, but I'm an alcoholic. I'm an alcoholic, and those things just don't mix. I moved back to Texas in 1980, and I like to say move back because it sounds better than unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. It was one of those spiritual moves in the middle of the night where you got the U-Haul trailer and you're throwing everything in it, and you're heading for that state line, and you cross that state line, and you kind of wipe the sweat off your brow, and you're never, ever going back there ever again. And, you really mean it, and you're really kind of okay because you don't know there's a step 9 in your future, so you're really off the hook. But by the time I got back to Texas, I had made a lot of other really, really poor decisions. And one of those was one night under the influence of alcohol, I let a friend put a needle in my arm. And by the time I got back to Texas, I was drinking alcoholically daily. I was smoking those funny cigarettes, I was taking those pills, and I was putting poison in my veins. And I was doing what I needed to do one day at a time. I knew about living one day at a time long before I came here. And when I did my 4th and 5th step, I learned a lot about some of the ideas that governed my life. And one of those ideas that ran my life was an old saying I was raised by. And it's a simple phrase that you made your bed, now lie in it. And I knew I was responsible for the bed I was lying in. I knew I was responsible for the position I was in and for the direction my life had taken. I knew no one put me where I was but me. And when you accept where you are, you do nothing to change. And I knew what happened to people like me. People like me end up in dumpsters. People like me end up shot and killed by other people like me. People like me end up going to prison for long periods of time, and when they get out of prison, they end up doing the same thing they did. People like me end up being shot and killed by police. But nothing good happens to people like me. And when you accept that, you do nothing to change. You fight and fight and fight until you can't fight anymore. And I had this marriage, and of course, you know, I've learned since I've been sober, it takes two healthy people to have a healthy relationship. Imagine that. And this relationship was not very healthy at all, and of course it would dissolve, and I had these two children who were left in my life, and you know, two beautiful children, and I wanted nothing more than to be a good mother, but I'm an alcoholic. And they didn't bargain for this, you know. I'm the kind of mother that goes to the store for a loaf of bread and I don't come back for 3 or 4 or 5 days. And I don't mean to do that. I'm going to the store for a loaf of bread. But when I come back, I am sick. I've been out on a run, I've been out on a binge, I've been out doing things that are not good. I was a parasite in our community. I was a person who had lost all values, all morals. I was a detriment to society. And I would come home after a binge, and I would be so sick and so tore down, and I would have these beautiful blonde-haired, gold-eyed children cleaning their mama up with a washcloth. And they would say things to me like, "Mama, if you don't drink, you won't get sick." And I knew that's the truth, because we know the truth when we hear it. And I would tell them, I would say, "You're absolutely right. I'm not going to do this anymore." I knew I couldn't do this anymore. I knew what I needed to do. So I would grab old willpower. I would grab old Will out of the closet, and I would pull him over there with me, and I would say, "Okay, we're not going to do this anymore, because my soul screams, I love you. I want to be here with you. I want to be a good mother. And today we're going to go to the park, or we're going to watch a movie, or we're going to play a game. Today we're going to do this, or the circus is coming into town this weekend, and we're going to go do that. Because I love you, and I want to do this. This is what I want to do." And I get up there, and I start walking off that drunk, and pretty soon that hand starts shaking. That knot starts in my gut, and it starts tightening. It's like this screw that's just tightening and tightening. And once that starts, and that hand starts going, the obsession hits. And when the obsession hits, it's not like I run through the house like a crazed maniac, although on many occasions I have. It's just this simple thought that says, "You know, Micki, if you take one drink, it'll calm those nerves. It'll quiet that shake. You can go in there and you can play with those kids." And so I take that one drink to quiet those nerves, and the drink takes me, and I got to go to the store for a loaf of bread. And that car turns left when I'm supposed to turn right, and I don't come back when I'm supposed to. And I left my children with people children don't need to be left with. My children have seen things that no child should ever see. My children have heard things that no child should ever hear. And my children have experienced things no child should ever experience. I don't believe that there's anything stronger than a mother's love for her child except the disease of alcoholism, because it took me from my children on a regular basis. Thank God I don't get what I deserve. We talk about God's grace so many times in Alcoholics Anonymous. I will tell you about God's mercy. The mercy of a loving God that can connect a family like mine, children like mine, with a mother like me, and can heal a relationship like ours is just beyond compare. The relationship I have with my children today is better than it ever could have been had we not gone through the things that we've gone through, but it could have turned out so drastically different. When I was 6 years sober, my daughter had become a young woman before my eyes, and by the time I was 6 years sober, Alcoholics Anonymous had given my children a mother they could come to. And not only that, by the time I was 6 years sober, Alcoholics Anonymous had given my children a mother that my children could depend on. Because I started showing up when I said I was going to show up. I started doing what I said I was going to do when I said I was going to do it. And our life took on new meaning. We did no longer regret the past. We no longer wished to shut the door on it. We started a relationship that was just built on trust and an honest, true relationship. But at 6 years sober, my daughter came to me with some stuff that would bring me to my knees once again. Talk about surrender. My daughter had started a relationship with a young man when I was 6 years sober. She had started growing up, and she was having problems with intimacy. And at 6 years sober, she told me why. And the reason why was because when she was between the ages of 6 and 8 years old, when I was at the store getting a loaf of bread, she would be repeatedly molested by the neighborhood 15-year-old boys. How do you make amends for that? How many times I was able to convince myself I'm not hurting anybody but myself? How do you make that right? Thank God I was able to keep my ego in check, that I didn't want to run out and go find these young men and do what ego wanted to do, but rather surrender and do what I needed to do for my child and get her the professional help she needed. And 2 years ago, this past April, my daughter walked down the aisle with a young man, and she was married, and she walked down the aisle a free young woman because of the help and the work that she has done. And when I say, thank God I don't get what I deserve, you know I mean that. You know I mean that. Well, if you're paranoid and you think they're out to get you, they are. And in 1986, they came and got me, and I was arrested and charged with a first-degree felony, punishable by up to 99 years in the penitentiary. I thought, man, these guys are just a little bit serious, you know? I mean, after all, I'm just hanging out with my buddies, my pals, my compadres. They call that organized crime. And they don't like that in Texas. And so I ended up in jail and bonded out, and I'm one of those alcoholics that gets in trouble when you're in trouble. And I've been in jail a lot of times, and I bonded out in jail, got in trouble. I went back to jail, and I was held at no bond. And I sat in jail for a long time. I went to a pretrial hearing. They offered me 20 years in the penitentiary, and I decided to go to a jury trial. So they let me out on a second bond, and I'm waiting for this jury trial. And I sat in jail long enough to where I heard about that, listened to some of that jailhouse talk. And I heard about people saying, you know, if you go to AA, it looks good when you go to court. And I'm sure y'all don't do that over here in Louisiana, but that was going around in Texas. And so they said it looked pretty good if you go to AA, you know, before you go to court. So I was almost willing to go to any lengths to look good when I went to court. So I decided to go check out some AA meetings. So I went to the Bryan group of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I walk in, and you did what you do. You welcomed me with open arms, and you said, come in. You're the most important person here. And I thought, hell, I know that, you know. I'm facing 99. Of course I'm the most important person here. And they began to share a little bit about what it was like and what happened and what it's like now. And there was a guy who jumped up in the back of the room, and he talked about how his drinking had gotten so bad that his wife left him. And the pain of that was so great that he put the plug in the jug, and he went to AA, and his wife came back, and his life is wonderful. And I'm thinking to myself, gee, dude, one wife, one time? I mean, come on, I know some women that'll drink with you. Hang in there. But he was talking about true love, and I was so far removed from any of that, I didn't understand what he was saying. And there was some girl who jumped up in the back of the room, and she was so excited. She had worked at this part-time minimum wage job long enough to save up enough money for a used vehicle. And everybody just applauded. They were so excited for her, and I was like, chick, see me after the meeting. I can get you a better deal than that. Might not have a title, but I can get you a better deal than that. But she was talking about an honest day's pay for an honest day's wage. And I was, again, so far removed from that, I didn't understand what she was saying. So I thought I was too bad for AA. Imagine that. You talk about some arrogance, right? I was too bad for AA. So I went to a few meetings, but I didn't stay. And, of course, I ended up going to this trial by jury. They say it's a jury of your peers, but I promise you there wasn't anybody there I'd have hung out with, let me tell you. And, of course, they found me guilty, and they considered what the prosecution had requested. But this jury came back with a verdict that was probably the worst thing you could do to somebody like me. It was a blessing, but I couldn't see it. That's how sick I was. They came back with with the punishment of 10 years intense supervision probation. They were giving me another opportunity, and I was so sick I couldn't see it. I was so angry. Now, I didn't want to go to prison for 20 years, but I wouldn't have minded of going for a little while and come back out. But here I am. I don't want anybody telling me what to do. I don't want anybody breathing down my neck, telling me where I can go, where I can't go, who I can hang out with, who I can't hang out with, pee in this cup, telling me how to run my life. Now, by this time, I have lost everything I have. I've lost my house, I've lost my cars, I've lost my children, I've lost my everything. I'm living in an abandoned house. I have no running water and no electricity, and I'm worried about somebody telling me what to do. I mean, that's how sick I was. And the judge told me that day, he said, you know what? He said, this was in December of '86. He said, I'm going to give you until February 5th to get your act together. And he said, you better dot every I and cross every T, or I will gladly send you to the penitentiary for 10 years. And the reason I was so angry is I know anger is fear. And I knew I could never stay sober for 10 years. I knew that was impossible. And I left the courtroom that day and did what I knew to do to make it go away for one more day. I'll worry about it tomorrow. It was always tomorrow. I've always had some kind of belief in God, and I always found God every time I went to jail. When nobody was looking, I'd always kind of scoot over by the cot, and I'd kind of kneel down, and I'd say that prayer that we all say when we're in jail. God, please get me out of this one. I'll never do it again. And you mean that when you say that, you wouldn't lie to God. God knows the truth. And I really believe they could put a lie detector on her arm and it wouldn't quiver at all. I really meant that when I was saying that. But I didn't know how to take God with me. And therefore, every time I got out of jail, I left God locked up in jail. God spends a lot of time in jail, because I didn't know how to take God with me into my daily life until I found you, until you taught me how to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, and taught me how to remove the things that block me from a conscious contact with God. But, here I am, I'm out, I've got this probation I'm looking at, and I don't know what to do. So I am making it go away for one more night. I'll worry about it tomorrow. Well, I had one person that was left in my life. All of my friends were either heading for the border, in prison, or dead. And I had one young man that was left in my life. And I always liked those young men. I always thought if you got them young, you could train them. So we go out to those sordid places, and you see him across the crowded dance floor, and you throw out that line, and you reel him in, and you give him your experience, strength, and hope, right? And you do what you got to do, and you bring them in, and as soon as they do something you don't approve of, well, you got to get rid of that one, but you can't get rid of them until you've got another one, right? Can't ever be without one. I discovered when I did my fourth and fifth stat that whatever I had to get rid of this guy for, the next one paid for it. And whatever I had to get rid of that one for, the next guy paid for both of those. I ended up abusing a lot of men for things they never did. I mean, how crazy is that, you know? And so, but I had this one young man that was left in my life. God bless him, you know. His name was Bud. He was 24 years old. Cute, cute, cute. And he had been there with me with the Great Fall. I mean, he watched me lose everything, and he had hung in there with me. And he came to me one night in this abandoned house, and he began to ask me questions I had no answers for. He began to ask me what life was about. I had no clue. He began to ask me what I was going to do. I had no clue. And then he made a grave error. He began to point out my failures. Not a good thing to do. And I don't know about you, but anytime anybody began to point out my wrongs, I do whatever I have to get you away from me, whether that's attack you physically, emotionally, or verbally. And I will tell you, our tongues can be like a sword. And I sliced that young man up. And finally he looked at me and he dropped his shoulders and he said, "You know what, Micki, I can't live like this anymore." He said, "I'm out of here." And I made that grandstand play I had made so many times before. I said, "You go ahead and leave, big boy, because I don't need you. I don't need anybody. I don't need anything. If everyone would leave me alone, I'd be okay." And I really believe that. And that young man walked out of my life that night, and I went back in and did what I had to do to make it go away for one more night. I'll worry about it tomorrow. The sun came up the next morning, and I walked outside. The sun comes up as it always does. And I walked outside, and my life changed from that day to this. I found that young man's solution to our problems. His body hung from a tree limb with a rope around his neck, and he had been dead for about 5 hours. While I was in there making it go away for one more night, he was making it go away forever. And a lot of people told me a lot of things about his death. They told me he was a coward, that he couldn't face life on life's terms. Well, I tell you what, I'm pretty brave and I'm pretty tough, and I have scars to prove it. But I couldn't get in a tree and put a noose around my neck and jump. If I could, you'd have a different speaker here tonight. I don't believe his death was about being a coward no more than I believe it was about being brave. What I believe his death was about was being in so much pain that death seems like your only solution. I know many of us have been to that jumping off place. And he jumped. And I know today, without a shadow of a doubt and without any reservation, that that young man sits by the right hand of God today. Father Martin says, for every one of us that dies from this disease, buys sobriety for someone else. Well, I know who bought my sobriety, but the price was high. The price was high. Because that day I looked death in the face, my life changed from that day to this. I've seen dead people before. I've seen people shot. I've seen people stabbed. I've seen people overdose. But this was different. I saw death in the face. And death looked back at me, and I knew I was next. I knew I was next. And I started running, and I started running, and I started running. And have you ever tried to outrun yourself? And I couldn't go fast enough. I just couldn't go fast enough. And I started running, 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 and finally the miracle happened. I was driving in this truck, and I pulled over on the side of the road, and the gift happened. And the gift for me came in the form of a tear. Because you see, I'm a tough broad. I think it was Melvin talked about not crying. You don't cry out there. You don't let people see you cry. That's a sign of weakness. I didn't cry, but one tear started running down my face. And when that one tear ran down my face, it opened the floodgates for years of uncried tears. And I started bawling, and I couldn't stop. And I pulled off, I was off on the side of the road, and I broke down, and I was just crying. And I don't know how long I was down there, but after a while I sat up and I looked around, and I had that deja vu feeling. I knew I'd been there before, and I couldn't figure it out. And then I started seeing people walking, and they were carrying the beautiful book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was outside that stupid AA meeting I had been to many months before with no thought of ever returning back there ever again. I believe at that point of surrender, God intervened. And I was outside that stupid AA meeting I'd been to. And people were walking inside. And I knew there was some power in that cab of that truck with me. I knew that I had to get inside that meeting or I was going to die. And I started up the sidewalk. It was cold. It was raining. I fell down. And I literally crawled into what I consider my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd love to tell you the Bryan group of AA rushed to my side with a plate of donuts and a cup of coffee, saying, "Let us help you up, you poor precious child of God." But that's not what they did. They had seen the news, they had heard the deal, they came down, they looked down their long, skinny noses at me, and they said, "Are you sick and tired of being sick and tired, and have you had enough?" And I had had enough, and I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I was exhausted. I was so tired. I just couldn't go anymore. And I got in a chair, and I sat in the chair, and I don't remember anything that was said except keep coming back. So I just kept coming back. I had nowhere else to go. I started coming to some meetings, and people told me that this was a program of complete, total abstinence. So I went complete, total abstinence, and I got really sick really quick. I started going to meetings, and I started shaking. And I started getting physically ill. And somewhere along the line, I don't remember what day it was I got sober. I don't know the actual date. But somewhere I magically remembered I was supposed to see this probation officer on February 5th of 1987. And I went to see her. And when I walked in her office, she looked at me and said, "My God, Micki, can you do this by yourself?" And I said, "No, I'm sick. My hair was falling out, my skin was peeling, I'm shaking, I'm trembling, I'm sick to my stomach." And she tried everywhere to get me into some facility, but there was nothing back in those days. I didn't have any health insurance. I didn't have any $20,000 or $30,000 saved for when I needed to go to treatment. And the only thing that was available to me was Austin State Hospital, and there was a 3-month waiting list, and I was dying today. When Alcoholics Anonymous says they can love you sober, by God, I'm living proof. I'm living proof. So I went into those meetings, and I hung onto the bottom of those chairs, and I shook, and there were times I would vomit on myself, and you cleaned me up, and you said, "If you don't put any more of that poison in your body, this too shall pass, and you never have to go through this again." And I hung on to that, and I hung on to that. And after about 6 weeks, I started feeling a little bit better. I started feeling physically better. So I started sitting on the back row. And in Texas, we call the back row death row. So I started sitting in the back. And I'm loud. I'm obnoxious. I'm back there telling you how it is. I don't need to listen to that how it works anymore. I'm sitting on that back row, and I'm telling you how big and bad and tough I am. I'm telling you about how those big deals I made out there on the street. I'm telling you how it is out there in the real world on the street. Let me tell you how tough I am. And pretty soon there was a guy named Charlie. Every group's got a Charlie. Charlie's got 15 years sober. Charlie's got an answer for everything. And I found out later, if they don't know what the answer is, they tell you it's in the book. I say that all the time now. But Charlie came to the back and he said, Micki, why don't you fix your coffee and come sit up front with us? And I thought, well, they finally want to know what it's like out there. So I went and fixed my coffee, and I sat up there next to Charlie, who leaned over to me and said, sit here and shut up and listen. And Charlie probably saved my life. And for the next 3 months, the only thing they let me do in Alcoholics Anonymous was read how it works. Because there's no cuss words in how it works. I threw one in every now and then just to kind of liven that thing up, you know, because it got boring quick. Then the next thing they did was they made me be the greeter at the door. Now, you had to really want to be sober to come through that door when I was the greeter. I don't look anything like I do now. When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm about 5'10". When I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, I weighed about 115 pounds. I had this pasty gray complexion because I hadn't been out in the sun in 7 years. I was wearing skin-tight blue jeans or these black leather pants tucked in these knee-high boots with a brass tip on the end because I was cool. I had these black T-shirts with the sleeves cut out and the neck cut out because I'm hot. I had a big black wallet in my back pocket with a dog chain that hung down to my knees and hooked up on my belt because I am tough. I had a big wad of keys on my hip so it made a lot of noise when I walked. Now I'm living in an abandoned house. My truck starts with a screwdriver, but I got a big wad of keys on my hip because I'm important. I had a big leather jacket with this fringe that hung down all over it. I had this hat that I had pulled down over my eye, and I had to wear my sunglasses in those meetings because that light was just a little bit too bright. I heard someone say we are sensitive alcoholics, you know. And I am your greeter at the door. I came in driving this truck, and I got to tell you about this truck because I got this truck in a deal I made. I gave a guy half a gram of drugs. He gave me this truck. I figured it out one day. That truck cost me $12.50, and I got ripped off. This truck had been sunk in a tank of water long enough until the entire floorboard and the bed had been completely rusted out. The only place you could put your feet were on the pedals. I had to steal carpet to put in the floorboard to keep the trash from blowing up on me when I was driving down the road. It had wires coming out of places wires aren't supposed to be. It would take me 10 minutes to get it cranked up. I'd put it in reverse and it'd die. I'd get it cranked up, put it in reverse, and it would die. But I always thought it was so interesting and so kind that these AA men would stand out on the porch to make sure the truck would get started and get going. I thought it was so sweet until I found out they were placing bets, you know. But that's how I came to you in Alcoholics Anonymous. A $12.50 truck, the clothes on my back, an abandoned house, a filthy mouth, and a bad disposition, and you took me in anyway. You took me in anyway, and you started talking to me. Charlie started talking to me about getting a sponsor. And I'd look over at the coffee pot, and I'd see that young man with 30 days, and I said, Charlie, I bet he could keep me sober tonight. And Charlie said, men work with men and women work with women. I said, I hate women, Charlie. You know, one of the things that kept me coming back to AA was Al-Anon. Because on Tuesday night and Friday night at the First Methodist Church, they had an Al-Anon meeting upstairs and a closed AA meeting upstairs at the First Methodist Church. And I used to love to go to that closed AA meeting upstairs just to terrorize those Al-Anon women. Lack of power was not my dilemma. I'd start up those stairs, swinging that chain, rattling those keys. I'd round the corner and they'd scatter. I'd kind of hiss at them a little bit, throw a little spit, throw around. You want some of this? I didn't think so. I hated women, but particularly these Al-Anon women, because they were just so color coordinated, They always had these little matching outfits on where their little bottoms matched their tops, and they had these little purses where their flats, their little pumps matched their purse, and they had makeup on and their hair fixed. I mean, they looked just like I do now. But I hated them. I couldn't stand them. And I hated women because I knew how I was, and I assumed all women were like me, right? But I didn't want any women, I couldn't stand women. And then I became a chronic complainer in AA. And I'm sure y'all don't have any of that problems here in Louisiana, but man, I became a chronic complainer. I mean, look at the state of my affairs. I'm $12.50 truck. I have living in an abandoned house. And some of those old timers were mean to me, They would say things like, get a job, I mean, what happened to being the most important person at the meeting, And finally, this woman came up to me after the meeting one day, and she said, Micki, I want to tell you you're full of shit, and turned around and walked off. And I went to tell her I was the most important person at the meeting, but my mouth opened, and a voice like mine came out and said, will you be my sponsor? Grave error, grave error. She turned around and looked at me from the top of my head to the tip of my toes and square in the eye and said, I don't like you, but I'll help you because I have to stay sober. Well, la-ti-da, She said, do you have a big book? I said, no. She said, do you have any money? I said, no. She said, well, steal one. You can make amends later. So I did. She said, this is not in the big book, but I'm going to tell you this. She said, no relationships for the first year. I said, what? She said, yes. If there is anyone who will have anything to do with you, they are so sick you need to run screaming the other way. And funny or not, that kind of made sense to me, She said, you have got to have a relationship with God before you can even think about having a relationship with another human being. And that did make sense to me. So we got busy, and we went to the book, and she told me, she said, I started to complain. She said, get a job. And so I went to the noon meeting, and they said, are there any AA-related announcements? I said, yes, I need a job. And by the time that meeting was over, I had my first job in AA, and I went to work in an assembly line drilling holes in marble sinks in a 120-degree sweatshop. I learned about a day's pay for a day's wage. I learned about punching a time clock. And when I got my first paycheck, I went to my home group, and they passed the basket, and I put my dollar in there, and I got a standing ovation. And they said, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous, And I was so excited. I ended up saving up a little money, and I got into an apartment in the bad part of town in the middle of Crack Alley, but $200, all bills paid. But, when they say you can get sober anywhere, I believe that, and I certainly did. Of course, I would get out of my car, and I would hold my breath until I got into my apartment because I didn't want to test dirty on my urine screen at the probation department. But I'm reporting to my probation officer, and I'm doing what I'm supposed to do, and I started working the steps with my sponsor, and my life changed drastically and dramatically, and things just started taking off. Step one is the problem, and step two is the solution, and my sponsor said, you've got a decision to make. Either keep drinking until you die, or try life on a spiritual basis. You've run out of all other options. And if you're going to try life on a spiritual basis, you've got to work the rest of the steps. So I'm living in this little apartment. I'm working. I'm reporting to my probation. I'm going to meetings every day, sometimes 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 times a day. And I'm going to meetings, and I'm calling my sponsor every single day, and my life began to change. And I did a 4-step, and with my sponsor, under her direction, I did a 5th step with my sponsor, and I went home for that careful consideration for the first 5 proposals. And during that hour, I had to go to the restroom. And I went into the restroom, and I turned the light on, and I saw my reflection in the mirror. And for the first time in my life, I saw who was looking back. And after doing that 4th step and that 5th step with my sponsor, what I saw looking back was not pretty. I saw how dishonest, how selfish, how ugly I had been my whole entire life, how manipulative, how horrible I had been in my life. The miracle happened for me in step 6 and step 7, because for the first time in my life, I knew what needed to be changed, and with your direction and God's strength, I could change. I could change. So I started changing. Step 8 and step 9, it was easy to go to my family to try to make those amends, but I got busy on a lot of amends. I thought when I first got sober I was going to have to move out of my area because we make those excuses, too many connections, know too many people, blah, blah, blah. The wisdom of the old-timers who sat me down and said, you will stay here and you will look this community in the eye and you will pay back what you have done. And thank God for that. So I got busy. I got involved with the H&I committee, and for the first 15 years I was sober, I was in a prison every weekend somewhere carrying the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't even know what I was carrying, but I was there. And going into the hospitals and institutions, I was going into the penitentiaries, I was going into the jails, I was going into the detention centers, into the schools, I was going to the Lions Club, I was going to the JCs, you name it. If somebody wanted to know about Alcoholics Anonymous, I am your girl, I'm going. I started going to all kind of places. I've been on 12-step calls. I don't know why this just popped into my head, but I went on a 12-step call to a nudist colony one time, you know. By that time, I had learned to be a hugger, but that day I was a shaker, and if it had been raining, I would have drowned. But, you know, I mean, I am willing to do whatever because I don't want to die. I don't want to die. And how free do I want to be? This got so good, I just couldn't hardly believe it. Oh, my God. I could look the world in the eye. I'm okay to be alone. I'm feeling so good. I can feel God in my life. And my life just got so good. My probation officer helped me get back into school, and eventually I ended up getting some initials behind my name, and I'm just doing so good. And I did a 3.5 years of this 10-year probation, and the judge calls me back in his chambers, and he says, Micki, I hear about the good works you're doing in our community. I'm doing these things so I don't die. I'm doing these things because I'm so grateful to Alcoholics Anonymous. And he says, I hear about the things you're doing in our community. He says, I believe you're a changed person, and I'm releasing you from the bondage of the state of Texas. How is that? After being convicted by a jury. So I knew a new freedom and a new happiness, you know. My probation officer, who's been very instrumental in my life, she said, Micki, I want you to take this a step further. And I've learned to do the footwork and leave the results up to God. And so I just did that. I did some more paperwork, and I waited. So a few years went by, and then I got a call. I got a call from the governor's office. I received a full pardon from the governor of the state of Texas, restoring my full civil rights. A pardon is an act of grace. It's an act of forgiveness. And I've been given a pardon for my crimes. What does that have to do? What does that mean? Well, I knew God had a plan for that. I knew this had to be for God, because I tell you, I don't need it to build my ego. You know, I can do that well enough. But I knew God had something planned for that. I worked real hard. I went to work for a nonprofit organization, and I worked my way up to middle management, and things were going really, really good. And then 13 years ago, we had major funding cuts in the state of Texas, And when you have major funding cuts, middle management's the first thing that goes. And so 13 years ago, I'm without a job. And that was the first time I'd been without a job since I had raised my hand in that AA meeting, at that noon meeting that day. That's the first time and I didn't know what I was going to do 13 years ago. So I'm unemployed for a couple of days, and the phone rings, and a familiar voice says, "I hear you're looking for a job." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, why don't you come work for us?" And that familiar voice was my probation officer. I could not work where I'm working today if I had not gotten that pardon. And for the last 13 years, I've been working for Brazos County Adult Probation, where I was on probation. I'm in the computer and on the computer. And I have people that come and sit in my office all the time, and they sit across from me, and they go, "But lady, you don't understand." I kind of get a kick out of that. And I serve as our program coordinator, and we have a lot of programs in-house, and I sit on our drug court team, and it's really phenomenal. Last year, this is not, please don't think I'm boasting about this, but it's just kind of freaking amazing. Last year, the Texas Association of Drug Court Professionals, which is a statewide thing, awarded me the Judge Joel Bennett Award for the state of Texas. Wow. My daughter posted on Facebook 27 years ago, all the state of Texas wanted to give my mom was a set of handcuffs and a bag of lunch. So how do you get from there to here? 12 simple steps. All I did was started doing the things that was suggested to me to do so that I didn't die. All I did was started doing the things that were suggested of me to do. And you know, the good things that happen in my life today are not because I'm good. Please don't hear that. The good things that happen in my life today are because God is good. And God wants me to have absolutely the very best. And I would love to tell you that every meal has been a banquet and every day has been a holiday, but that's not been the case. I have had a lot of pain in the last 28 years. I've had my heart broken. I've not been married since I've been sober. I've left you guys alone. I've not been married since I've been sober, but I have been fully self-supporting through my own contributions, which is pretty cool. You know, I've had my heart broken. You know, I've been in love, and when I love, I love. But what I've learned is that love is 100% good, and when it hurts, it's something else. It's usually my ego. But that love is 100% good. And I keep doing the work, and I keep turning the pages and trusting and knowing that good things are going to come to pass. About the same time I was getting that pardon from the governor of the state of Texas, I was getting really, really tired, and I was really, really worn out, seriously worn out. So I ended up going to the doctor, and they ran some tests, and they came back, and they said, "Micki, you need to get your affairs in order. You've got terminal cancer." And I couldn't believe it was happening to the most important person at the meeting. And I walked outside, and I looked up, and I said, "God, why me?" And I heard my sponsor's voice say, "Why not you?" And so I surrendered to my cancer like I surrendered to everything. And I ended up at MD Anderson Cancer Hospital in Houston, Texas. And they ran a bunch of tests. And I had colorectal cancer. And they ran a bunch of tests. And I guarantee you those doctors have boldly gone where no man has gone before. And I went in and I told my doctor, I said, "Doc, I know where I got this cancer." He said, "Micki, no, I was 38 years old, stage 4 colorectal cancer." He said, "No, Micki, you're way too young." I said, "No, Doc, I'm telling you, I know how I got this cancer." He said, "How?" I said, "From so many years of men blowing smoke up my ass." We got to know why, right? But he ended up coming back and he said, "You're not going to like what we're going to have to do, Micki, but I believe I can save your life." And I said, "Go for it. Let's do it." So I did radiation and chemotherapy. I lost every hair on my body, every hair on my head, had to fight the lesbians off, you know. And I did a lot of things. I did hands-on healing. I did Reiki. I went to Indian sweat lodges. I slept on beds of magnets. I ate herbs. I drank aloe vera juice. I burned sage. I have feathers. I have crystals. I have angels. I went to prayer grams, prayer circles. I went to churches where people talk in tongues, fell out on the floor, waved snakes in the air. You name it, I did it. If somebody came by and said, I believe this will help you, I'm in, let's go. Well, let's go. People asked me what it worked. I said it all worked. It wasn't important whether I believed it would work or not, but you believed it would work. And if you believe, there's power in whatever you believe. Pay attention to that, because there's also power in the lies we believe. We've proven that, or we wouldn't be here. So there's power in whatever we believe. What worked? It all worked. I've been cancer-free for 20 years. Thank God. Thank God. Thank God. But I had a friend of mine came by, one of my scooter friends, and I still ride a scooter today. I had one of my scooter friends came by, and he said, Micki, are you angry with God? I said, angry with God? And he said, you've got this horrible cancer, and you might die. I was so grateful I had done the work. I was so grateful I didn't wait for tragedy to hit and then try to figure out where God is. I was so grateful I had done the work and I knew where I was and I knew where God was, and I had no longer had the positions confused, and that I no longer had some God on some throne that was sitting there somewhere saying, you know, Micki looks like she's doing okay. Let's flick a little cancer on her and see how she handles that. Because if I believe God is testing me, or if I believe God is doing this, if God had anything to do with this cancer, then God is my problem. And God can't be my problem and my solution. When I didn't know if I was going to live or die from this thing, my prayer was, God, please allow me to walk through this with grace and dignity. Please allow me to remain a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, because this is the highest honor I can achieve in this life. This is the highest honor you can bestow on me. Pay attention to what we believe. One other quick thing. Keep doing the work. Keep flipping the pages, because amazing things will come to pass, because God is good. God is good. I get to travel around. I talk a lot. I go places. It's amazing. It's incredible. I don't understand it, but it's just incredible. Get a lot of emails. Now it's Facebook. I get a lot of stuff from a lot of people. About 11 years ago, I came home one night, and it's an email from a young girl named Kimberly. She lives in Sugar Land, Texas, a couple hours away from me. So we emailed back and forth for a little while, and then my daughter Monica and I went to Sugar Land, Texas to meet Kimberly. And Kimberly's the daughter I gave up in 1972. How good is my God? How good is my God? And it's in God's time. It's not in my time. You know, I'm probably not what I should be, and I'm probably not what I could be. But thank God I'm not what I used to be. Thank you for having me here.
Wow. Wow, 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 wow. Okay, so, all right, where was I? So what's going on? Thank you very much, huh? How about it? Micki B, huh? Okay, so we're going to have a break until about 5 o'clock. Then we have we have a buffet that's going on from 5 to 7 p.m. You want to buy tickets? There's not very many left. They're at the registration table right up here. We got 50-50, over $800 50-50, guys, right? We got an auction going on a little later with a couple of pictures I'm going to be up here acting a plumb fool with.